Hi, my name is Noah Gift, and I'm going to talk about how to pass any AWS exam. Really, there's some common techniques that apply to every single AWS exam, from Cloud Practitioner all the way up to a professional exam or the AWS Machine Learning Certification or data analytics, these specialization exams. There's many things that are really kind of a central focus that you can perfect, and once you pass one exam, the next exam is all the more easier. So some of the things that I'll talk about are, how to effectively read the exam guide, how to actually practice on your own, how to actually use white papers to selectively understand the key concepts, and then finally how to go through and look at different official and unofficial exam guides. So I'm going to use the Cloud Practitioner exam as a guide here to kind of walk through the concepts of how to study for an exam. Again, this could apply to any AWS exam, but if you are studying for the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, this in particular would be very helpful because I'm going to use that as really the reference for how to study for an exam. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll talk to you soon. Let's get into the details of how to pass any AWS exam. I have a repo here that I put some notes down. Really, the first place to pass any AWS exam is the exam guide itself. And if you go through this link here, I can open it up in a tab. And notice there's a section for AWS that walks you through how to prepare for your AWS certification exam. And it's surprising how many people don't go through this resource and then later don't pass the exam. Really, this is the basics, is to start at the official information for AWS. I've taught thousands of students, and this is really the first portion where I would recommend a student to start at. And really, depending on what exam you're going to take, if you're going to take the foundation level exam, there's information here, associate level like solutions architect, professional level or specialty like AWS machine learning certification. There's all links here that walk you through all of the different information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this foundational level AWS certification, and I'm going to look at this Cloud Practitioner. I'm going to use this for the rest of this video. I'm going to walk through all the different things that are important, but important to say as well that this applies to any AWS certification. You can use these same techniques. So the first thing is it's important to go through the exam guide in particular. So let's go ahead and take a look at this exam guide. And notice here that it walks you through and tells you what it's going to test you on. So it's important to know that you're going to need to explain the value of AWS, also know about the shared security model, understand the security best practices, understand AWS cloud costs, economics, and billing practices, and also describe and position the core services. So this is something that comes up a lot when you're studying for an AWS exam, is knowing how to compare one service with another service. And this is beyond just the Cloud Practitioner exam. You can bet that if there are multiple services, they'll ask you the differences between those two services. And then also identify the correct service for a common use case. Notice here this target candidate description here. I personally wouldn't take it too seriously. This is just something that I think they throw in there to maybe mitigate people, failing the exam. Is they put some information there to really to warn someone that they are going to need to study. But really, I think most of these exams, with practice and hands-on, practice especially, you can pass any AWS exam. They'll also tell you some things that you don't need to know. So this initial certification here, you don't need to understand coding, for example. This is more of a business manager type certification. And then finally, they'll go into the different kinds of exam content. So it is important to know this, that there is a strategy when you're taking these exams. And depending on what kind of test you're taking, it could be more or less difficult. And in particular, the ones that are more challenging are when there are two or more correct responses. And so really it's critical to know the correct services. And this is how you can get yourself in trouble on an exam, is that if you don't know the name of a particular service, it's really easy to say, oh, sure, that's probably the correct service because it sounds like it could be the correct service. But this is where memorization really does play a huge role in passing an exam. And then finally here, they'll also go through and they'll break down the different categories for each AWS exam. So this also might be something that you can use when you're studying, is make sure that you prioritize the larger sections. So in this case, technology would be a good place to spend a lot of your time, and billing would be maybe, still important, but less important than technology or security or cloud concepts. So this can help you when you're maybe getting to the end of studying for an exam, is, if you're going to spend a little bit more time mastering something, master the things that are most heavily covered and spend less time on the things that are less covered in the exam. Finally, this is, I think, a very good idea, is when they break down the outline like this, is to go through step by step and make sure that you have, in particular, these concepts memorized. So let's go through here and make sure in this specific diagram here or outline that we go through and we understand these. So they're talking about the benefits of security. So why would you care about security? Well, you can make sure that your data is encrypted. That could be one example of security that you get from AWS. Reliability, this would mean that that the S3 environment, for example, has very high reliability, and also it has high availability. So it's good to map these terms onto specific services. Elasticity here, we know that elasticity is the ability to go up and down according to the demands of your environment, much like a utility company. Agility would be, like DevOps type practices. So the ability to use continuous integration, make microservices do things. Also, pay-as-you-go pricing. This is a really key concept in cloud computing, in that you don't have to put $1 million into a company. You can start with just a laptop and a credit card. Scalability as well, that the AWS cloud platform has the ability to scale to large capacity. There's also global reach, so there's data centers all over the world. And then finally, just like Walmart or Costco, there's economies of scale where you get a lower price because you're working with a large company. And then, so again, that is an example of how I can walk through each one of these concepts and make sure that I know what they do, so that when I'm exposed to a question on the exam, I'm not surprised. And this is, I think, very critical, but also pretty easy to do. Walk through the outline, make sure you write up some kind of an explanation of what you think these things are, because they're giving you really a step-by-step instruction path on how to pass the exam. Again, walking through the next section here, I could do the same thing. What's the role of operational expense? What's the role of cap expense? This is really, I think, one of the most important ways to study for the exam is go through the outline, make sure you have the ability to write some kind of a paragraph for each one of these concepts inside of here. If you do that, you're probably right off the bat, you've got maybe an 80% chance of passing, because you've meticulously covered each one of these items in the outline. Now, let's go to the next section here, which is memorize the vocabulary in the exam guide and the white paper. So as I was mentioning here, going back to this exam guide here, that if you don't know the name of one of these terms, and this is why I'm recommending to write a paragraph or a definition for each one, you will miss those questions. And in particular, Lambda, right? That can be many different things to many different people. Python, the language, has Lambda, which is a type of function. Lambdas are also something in advanced math, but also Lambda is a function as a service or microservice framework on the AWS cloud platform. And it's important to know that definition. Same with something like RDS. If you see the word RDS and you don't know what it is, they could present you with lots of tricky examples where you'll get yourself in trouble. So memorization is critical, right? So RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and it's a higher level service that AWS uses to manage many different kinds of databases. And so it's really, I think, almost impossible to pass exams if you are not memorizing each of the terms that appears inside of their outline. So this is really a critical best practice to make sure that you're going to pass the exam. Okay, let's go to the next section here, which is reading the white papers for the exam guide. So if we go again back to this section here, again, this is for every single exam. They have a link to the exact white papers. So let's go to this section, read AWS white papers. This will be for, they'll show you the specific white papers for the AWS Solutions Architect exam, which white papers for the AWS Machine Learning exam. In this case, there are 3 white papers they recommend you going through for the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam. So let's go through the first one here, overview of Amazon Web Services. And so I can just click on this link. Here we go. Overview of Amazon Web Services. Let's just walk through really quickly here and see what a white paper looks like. And you can see here, here's a table of contents. It goes through and it walks you through, it's maybe total, let's see how many pages here. We've got about 60 pages, and there's only 3 of these. So a total of 180 pages. Now, initially, if you're not familiar with reading white papers, this may seem overwhelming to you, where you are kind of getting excited about passing the exam, and then you see a 60-page white paper, and then there's 3 of these. So one thing to be aware of when you're reading white papers is that you can go through very quickly when you're reading a white paper. You don't need to memorize the whole thing. Really, a lot of times the best way to read a white paper is to read it maybe really quickly and several times, but to use it as a place where you can find the correct definitions for terminology. So remember, if we go back here and we go to the exam guide, right? Remember, there's all these different terms like AWS Cloud, Alexa, Amazon Chime, Amazon Workmail, all these things. All of these are very important ways to examine, things, and then go back to the exam guide and then make sure that with the white paper, you're able to fill in those definitions. So really, that's the goal of using these white papers, is to fill in the definitions from the outline. And that's how I would use it. And potentially just go through very quickly and read through, and even go to the section like, okay, maybe I don't know what that one is. Amazon Athena. Okay, what is it? Oh, it's an interactive query service that makes it easy to analyze data in Amazon S3 using standard SQL. Okay, there we go. So now I know the definition, and then it gives us a little bit more information. Amazon Athena is serverless, so there's no infrastructure to manage, and you only pay for the queries that you run. So those kinds of things are really critical to put into your vocabulary definition list. And so that's really the kind of the back and forth, where you look at the outline, you go to the white paper, fill out the information, and then go through and look things up. You don't necessarily have to exhaustively look through the entire outline. I think this is also a common mistake, is if you try to go through here and just memorize every single thing like this, it's not in context, and so it's a little bit more difficult, versus if you go and you know that there's a strategy, right, where you're following the exam guide here and you're looking at this outline and you're going to fill in each of these details and kind of hunt for it in a white paper and then fill it out. That's my recommendation of how to pass any AWS exam. Okay, let's move to the next section here, which is doing hands-on labs and practice on the free tier. Now, this is one of the things that I think is really critical to be aware of, is that there are lots of free labs that are available. And if you work at a university or you're a student at a university, one of the ways you can get access to it is something called AWS Academy. And let's go ahead and find this AWS Academy. What's nice about AWS Academy is that there are a bunch of labs that are high-level labs that allow you to practice directly on the AWS platform. So I'm going to go ahead and log into one of these. Let's go ahead and do this. AWS Academy. I'm going to log in here, and I'm going to log into one of my accounts. Okay, so once we go into this particular lab here, one of the things I can notice is that I have all these different Canvas courses, which is their learning platform. And then if this was a student account, for example, you'll see here that as I go through each of these modules and kind of go through here, that there'll be in particular labs here. And so if we go down to one of the labs, here we go, Introduction to AWS IAM, it'll spawn a new environment. allow me to go into it, log in, and play around with the technology. So if you have that ability, right, you've been able to get access to AWS Academy, that's a great way to learn. Now that's not the only way to learn. I think another way to learn is to actually create a free tier account with AWS. With the free tier account here, and let's actually just look this up really quick. Let's open up a new tab, AWS Free Tier. Here we go. You'll notice that with the free tier account that the free tier doesn't expire. For 12 months, you're able to get a bunch of offerings here, including a bunch of hours for micro instances, also the ability to store things in S3, RDS. There's tons of free things here that you can use when you're learning to study for these exams. And so that's really a great resource. Now, once you've logged in, one of the things that I would also recommend is that I would go through and explore each of these offerings. So if you've gone through again to the exam guide here, and you look at this again, this outline, and you look through and you say, let's see here, what is it? DynamoDB. I don't know what that is. Well, I would go into this and I would look at DynamoDB. So we can even do a search here. We can look for Dynamo. And one of the best ways to get started with a service is just to play around with it. And so here we see that Amazon DynamoDB is a non-relational database service. Okay, looks like there's a button called Create Table. Let's go ahead and click this button here, and I can go ahead and try it out. So we'll go ahead and say demo as a table, and this wants a primary key. And so I'm going to put one called Globally Unique ID, or GUID, and then I'm going to go ahead and say create. And then here we go. It's going to go through here and it's going to create a table for me, and then I can play around with it. Now, I've already played around with one earlier, so I can, grab one of these and go to items here. And you can see here I can create an ID here called red, and maybe make another one called blue. And you can see this is a great way to learn more about the service, is just play around with it and see what it is that it does. And then later I could go back here and I could say delete the table, and we can also see how to clean up what you're doing. So there is no substitute for going through each of these services here, either kind of step by step, where you go through all the compute, all the containers, or searching for the service and making sure that you understand it. If somebody's going to hire you to implement this technology on their platform, at a Fortune 500 company, you should know how to use all of these services because of the fact that they're expecting you have that competency. And so really there is no substitute for hands-on experience. Likewise, if we go into AWS storage here, we click on S3, and I want to see what it is, right? I can go through here, I can create a bucket, or look through some other resource here, see what's happening, maybe create a folder, demo. This is definitely one of the best ways to get started with the platform, is to play around with it. Now, there's a couple other ones that I would recommend other than just kind of poking around and playing on the services. There is the Cloud Shell here. And what is nice about the Cloud Shell is it gives you the ability to call the AWS services with a terminal. And in particular, no matter what exam you're going through, from the very beginning, AWS Cloud Practitioner, all the way through something like AWS Machine Learning Certification or a professional exam, it's critical to be aware of how you can interact with these services. And so one of the best ways to do it is with a terminal. And if we go back here and we go to AWS here, and I list, let's say AWS CLI like this, it shows me the AWS command line interface. And notice that the command line interface is a unified tool to manage the AWS services. So what's great about it is that it really has the ability to interact with all of AWS very easily. So let's go ahead and play around with this. Let's look at this example here and go back to this. Here we go. We're inside of a Cloud Shell. I'm going to type in AWS EC2 describe instances. And so what this will do is it will show me all instances that are launched. And in fact, I have none, right? So what's great about this is I know now that I don't have anything running here, and we can see that, basically there's nothing running, and I don't need to worry about being billed for those things. Now, the next thing that I can think, although we do have a T3 small, and that is one instance. So I could go through and I could go back to my EC2 environment here. Let's go ahead and go to EC2. Let's go ahead and find whether we can find this instance. And looks like maybe it's running in, it'll even tell us what region it's running in. Let's go ahead and see. This is US East 1B here. We have one instance, which is a T3 small. And I could go through here and find that and clean it up. Now, other things I can do as well with the CLI is I could look at auto scaling. I could create auto scaling groups. I could actually look at all of the different buckets that are available on my account as well. So let's go through here, and so AWS S3, you can see these are all the different buckets. So I would say one of the most effective ways to go through all the different services is to use the CLI inside of the AWS Cloud Shell environment. And again, what's powerful about this is that it very, very easily, it allows me to play around with things. So here's my personal website. Let's go through here and let's list what's inside that bucket. We can see that it doesn't find anything inside. Let's go ahead and read the documentation here and find out more about where that information is. So notice it says that we need to put S3 at the beginning of the bucket to find out what's inside of that folder. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back here and let's put in S3 like this, S3. And now we can see that it needs both S3 buckets information. If we put a slash, we still can't get access to it. So anyway, it's a good way to see whether there is something in a bucket or if it's empty, or explore the different things that you can do with the platform. And in particular, AWS, if we type in, I believe, help, it will tell us more information about what services are available. Let's go ahead and do AWS help. You can see here, this is Chameleon interface, and I can actually read through here and see that there's different formats out, and I also can use different regions. And then finally, I can look at every single service that I could explore by using this terminal background. So there's really no shortage of powerful things that you can do by exploring with the AWS terminal, and or going through the console and playing around with services and going through each one of these things. It really is an essential component of using the AWS platform. Now let's go through here and look at the sample questions next here. And this is a critical component of studying for the exam, is actually practicing the sample questions. So if we go back to the exam guide here, notice that they have something called download the sample questions. And we can actually go through here and just follow through some of the logic of these questions, and then make sure that we're really in the right place for the exam. And you may think, in fact, that I don't need to practice the sample questions, but what you might be surprised about is that a question that's very similar to this is going to be on the exam, and they give you, in this particular example, 10 questions. So if it's a 50 question exam, why would you put yourself, really at a more vulnerable state when you could have learned potentially 10 of the questions already on the exam and really get a running start? So it really is important to go through the official sample exam questions, because these almost exact questions can appear. There's no guarantee, but they can appear on the exam. So let's go through these 10 questions here and see what they do. So first question is, why is AWS more economical than traditional data centers for applications with varying compute? First one is, it would be Amazon EC2 costs are billed on a monthly basis. B, users retain full administrative access. C, EC2 instances can be launched on demand when needed, or D, users can permanently run enough instances to handle peak load. So if we go down to the very bottom here, we can look at the answer. It says C, the ability to launch instances on demand when needed allows users to launch and terminate instances in response to a varying workload. This is more economical than purchasing enough on-premise servers. So if you didn't get this, what I would do is make sure that you're able to find out the documentation where you were missing this question, and then go through and fill it out and complete the holes in your knowledge. So that's where these exam guides are really good as well. Sample questions is they allow you to find out what pieces of knowledge are missing. So that's why it's important to go through them. Let's go to the next one here, which is which AWS service would simplify the migration of a database to AWS? We have A, AWS Storage Gateway, B, AWS Data Migration Service, C, Amazon EC2, or D, Amazon App Service 2.0. So this again shows us if you don't know what these services are, this could sound like it could be anything, right? AppStream could be a whole number of different things. So you do have to know the terminology. So let's go down here again to the second question. It says B, AWS DMS, Database Management Service, helps users migrate databases to AWS quickly and securely. The source database remains fully operational during the migration, minimizing downtime to applications that rely on the database. AWS DMS can migrate the data to and from most widely used commercial and open source databases. All right, so that shows us that, again, really important to know the terminology. So let's go to the third question here. Which AWS offering enables users to find, buy, and immediately start using software solutions in their AWS environment? We've got AWS Config, AWS OpsWork, AWS SDK, or AWS Marketplace. Really important to know the terminology for this question. Let's scroll down to number 3 here. We see that AWS Marketplace is a digital catalog with thousands of software listings from independent software vendors that make it easy to find, test, buy, and deploy software that runs on AWS. So again, critical to know that information. If you didn't know it, you should put that into your personal study guide and make sure that you've memorized it and even clicked on the links of what AWS Marketplace is. Let's go to the next question. Which AWS network service enables a company to create a virtual network within AWS? We've got AWS Config, AWS Route 53, AWS Direct Connect, or Amazon VPC. Let's scroll down to question 4 here, and we see that D, Amazon VPC, lets users provision a logically isolated section of the AWS cloud where users can launch AWS resources and a virtual network that they define. So again, really critical to know what the service is. They give you a link to it. We could click on that link and open it up and see more about that particular service as well. So let's go back again to this exam guide here, which is, where is that exam guide? Here we go. So let's scroll back again to question 5. And which of the following is an AWS responsibility under the AWS shared responsibility model? Configuring third-party applications, maintaining physical hardware, securing application access and data, or managing guest operating system. So we scroll down to number 5. Maintaining physical hardware is AWS's responsibility under the AWS shared responsibility model. So again, AWS manages the physical data center itself. You as the customer manage higher level offerings on top of the things that they do. And that's really one of the advantages of AWS. Let's go to question 6 here. And which component of the AWS global infrastructure does Amazon CloudFront use to ensure low latency delivery? Well, we've got A, regions, B, edge locations, C, availability zones, or D, virtual private cloud. So CloudFront is really the key here. That is an important way to understand the question. Also low latency. Let's go down to number 6 here. And we see that to deliver content to users with lower latency, Amazon CloudFront uses a global network of points, edge locations, and regional edge caches. So that is the information necessary. B, the edge locations. And now if we go to 7, how would a systems administrator add an additional layer of login security to a user's AWS Management Console? A, use Cloud Directory. B, audit AWS Identity and Access Management or IAM roles. Or C, enable multi-factor authentication. Or D, enable AWS CloudTrail. So in particular, this question shows that it's a security question, and it talks about the console, login security. So if you have the correct vocabulary, this is a fairly straightforward question. And so let's go down here to the next question, which is C, multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is a simple best practice that adds extra layer of protection on top of username and password. With MFA enabled, when a user signs in, they'll be prompted for their username and password. That's the first factor, as well as a second level. So MFA device, for example. So both of these increase the security because it requires more than one way of authenticating. So let's go to the next question here is which service can identify the user that made the API call when an instance is terminated. And so this is also very critical for security here. Cybersecurity is a huge issue in today's world. And so you would need to know which of these services is able to tell us about auditing. And so again, knowing the vocabulary is critical. If you know the definitions of these services, then this is a very easy question. If you don't, then it's very easy to get confused because they all sound the same. Let's go to question 8. And AWS CloudTrail helps users enable governance, compliance, and operational risk and auditing of their accounts. Actions taken by a user, role, or service are recorded as events in CloudTrail. Event actions include AWS console, CLI, or SDK. So basically, CloudTrail keeps track of every single thing that happens in AWS by a user or a role or service, and so you can audit your system. This is why it's critical to have the vocabulary memorized. Let's go to 9. Which service would be used to send alerts based on Amazon CloudWatch alarms? So this is also a very simple question if you know the vocabulary. We've got SNS, CloudTrail, Trusted Advisor, or Amazon Route 53. Now, one thing you could do is because you've already answered a question, and if you do know what CloudTrail is, it's an auditing system, then I think it really is important to use that to your advantage. In this next question, you can say, well, we know that this is an auditing system, so it's very unlikely that this would be my first choice here because this is more of an alerting system. And so what we can do is we can go back down here, and of course it's correct that the CloudTrail was not the correct answer. It's Amazon SNS, which is a network, a notification service, simple notification service, and CloudWatch integrate together so users can collect, view, and analyze metrics. So again, having memorized terminology can be critical to narrowing down the correct questions. Final question here is, where can a user find information about prohibited actions on the AWS infrastructure, AWS Trusted Advisor, AWS Identity, IAM, billing, or acceptable use policy, right? And so this is a really important question to know about so that you don't get removed from AWS. In fact, we've had some very high-profile removals, in the last several years from AWS because of potentially one of these answers here. So let's go through and let's find it out. The acceptable use policy provides information regarding prohibited actions on the AWS infrastructure. So this is an important thing to be aware of. And again, we're able to find it out by going through and reading the documentation. So let's get to the final section here. We've really gone through and gotten to the end. Now, the last couple things I want to talk about those are the official questions, which you must do, in my opinion. But also, it's good to be aware of the fact that you can use unofficial sample questions. So one that I like a lot is the O'Reilly platform. So let's go ahead and click on the O'Reilly platform here. Notice that when I'm logged in, there's a certification section here. And in fact, I've even created some of these certification questions. So we have AWS ML, for example, or machine learning, that I've got some stuff on here for that. But basically, I've got some videos, but you can go through here and practice and look at different videos or different certification exams, let's say solutions architect, and do some of these sample guides here. Like here's an example. I could go through here, look at some of these sample guide questions, or go to a practice test here for solutions architecture, launch it. It'll go through and give me the answer. So it is actually a very good idea to go through and find one of these learning platforms, and it's kind of the final thing that you can do to help you study for the exam. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to go through and have like a Q&A type of thing. Every time you don't know something, write it up into a section like I did here. And these are all questions that I've collected from students who I've taught over the years to pass the AWS certifications. And a good example, so I'm having trouble understanding what RDS is and sharing a connection with a group of people. Is there an easy answer? You may find it more straightforward to use Cloud9 as the development environment to connect. Or the next one, the cloud service model is confusing. What is PaaS and why is it different than other models? So here's my answer. Is one way to think about cloud offerings is it's a comparison to the food industry. You can purchase food in bulk at Costco, but you also can do higher level services like Grubhub, Uber Eats. PaaS is a lot more like these higher level services of food because they do a lot of the work for you, et cetera, et cetera. You can go through and look at this on your own. So in a nutshell, it's really important to make sure you have a comprehensive list of strategies to pass the exam. Read the exam guide, memorize the vocabulary, read the white papers, do hands-on practice, then do the official exam guides, also do the unofficial sample questions, and then finally create your own Q&A. If you do all those things, you can pass any AWS exam.